Welcome back to the North Star Takes podcast with Bailey Pulicki and Jacob Liberta. You can find all our videos on our channel and feel free to give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram as well. Today we will be discussing the Minnesota Vikings positional breakdown. We'll be continuing our series and we are going to move ahead with the defensive line, which is arguably the most interesting position group going into training camp here. You have Danielle Hunter back on a new deal. It'll be good to have him back in the fold. Obviously, he's our best defensive lineman by far.
Oh yeah.
Just an elite pass rusher. Honestly, probably the best player on the defense. You got the additions of Michael Pierce and Dalvin Thomason as well. They signed Michael Pierce last year. He opted out due to COVID reasons. Dalvin Thomason was their big free agent signing this year. And then they also brought back Sheldon Richardson for a one-year deal, and he's going to be coming in off the bench mostly as a pass rusher in pass rushing situations.
It's huge depth.
So and then obviously the last defensive end spot is kind of up in the air, and no one's really sure who's going to take over that role. So how are you feeling about the way the defensive line looks, especially compared to how suspect it was last year?
I feel pretty good about it now compared to what we ended last year with, and I think this is arguably the most make or break part of our team that could really make our season a huge success or could honestly really tank it and go down the toilet. Because honestly, last year we desperately needed a better defensive line. I mean, they were just awful, plain and simple, especially at the end of last season, like those very last few games. I mean, everybody remembers Christmas in New Orleans. That was abysmal. And then you come back to the end of the season and nobody's really playing with any heart. So that's why none of them are back. And that's why we have a complete new crop of guys here starting on this defensive line to start the season. Right. So it all starts with Danielle Hunter, our elite pass rusher, who's one of the best in this league when he's healthy. So it remains to be seen coming off the neck injury, but I'm hoping he can return to form coming off 2 14.5 sack seasons these last 2 years. 2 years that he played anyway. Right. So I think that'll be huge. And then like you mentioned with all the defensive tackle additions, I'm really excited about that too, just to be able to stop the run. And I think we really needed that. And the only thing that concerns me is who's going to start opposite Danielle Hunter on that defensive line. I mean, who do you think is kind of the front runner right now?
I would say just by default, I think Stephen Weatherly has to be probably the front runner. I'd say just based off he's been in the system before. He played for the Vikings for a few years. Then he went to Carolina for a year. But he wasn't great last year. He didn't have any sacks with the Panthers. And I think the upside of DJ Wanham is just phenomenal, honestly. He looked pretty decent for stretches last year. He was a fourth round rookie, so you can't expect too much out of him. And they've kind of claimed that they feel he can be like Danielle Hunter 2.0 in terms of his athletic ability, that raw talent. And Andre Patterson kind of loves molding and developing those kind of guys. So honestly, it's probably just Stephen Weatherly by default, but I would not be surprised one bit if DJ Wanham is the starter at that spot and he earns it. And then you also have the two rookies, Patrick Jones and Janarius Robinson as well, that they drafted in the 3rd and 4th round this year. So, yeah, I'll be interested to see how that turns out. But I think DJ Wanham's probably got the most upside out of any of those guys, and he's the one that I'd personally like to see start there. How about you?
Yeah, I got to agree with you. I think he's got the inside track towards gaining that starting position. But obviously, Zimmer likes his veterans, especially a guy like Weatherly that they're bringing back into the fold. So I think it could very well just be him. But if Wanham looks good in camp, I don't see why it wouldn't be him. Like you said, we have a couple of rookies that could show some promise. But usually if he doesn't have to, Zim doesn't like to opt to rookies right away. Likes to make them earn it quite a bit. Yeah. But sometimes there's extenuating circumstances, like last year with the corners. But this year, I think it's a little bit different story. We got a little bit more depth. Yep. It's just a lot of guys that aren't quite proven yet. So, I mean, we'll have to see. But I really like what you had to say about Wanham and Patterson molding him. I know it can be a little bit of pressure putting that kind of title on him that he could turn into the next Danielle Hunter. But hopefully he can live up to it and kind of live up to expectations. I mean, he is a 4th-round pick after all. So, I mean, we can't expect like a ton, especially at this point. But hopefully just some steps forward from where he was last year. Yeah. Just be enough to be a guy that can win one-on-one matchups on the edge when basically everybody else on our defensive line is going to probably face a good amount of double teams. And,
right. That's a good point.
Things like that. So really just finding some guy to win one-on-one, and hopefully he can do that. So I'd say I'm pretty confident they can at least rotate guys in and stay fresh and win battles and create pressures just on a regular basis. But
for sure. Yeah. And then we forgot to mention also earlier that Michael Pierce recently suffered a calf injury. Yeah. In his workouts going into training camp here. So he's only expected to miss maybe the first week or two of training camp. It's not really supposed to, go into the regular season by any means, but hopefully that doesn't put him behind too much. It'd be nice to see the full complement of our defensive line right off the bat.
I know.
And that's going to be the main thing this year is just keeping people healthy, which obviously is hard in football, but hopefully no season-ending injuries. hopefully guys can just, miss a game here or there. So we'll have to see how that plays out. But going into the back end of our defensive line here, so we've talked about who could possibly start opposite Danielle Hunter. There's also some depth options behind the starters that are kind of intriguing. We already mentioned Sheldon Richardson, who's going to be a depth piece, pass rusher coming off the bench on third down situations. You have Janarius Robinson and Patrick Jones, obviously the two rookies. You still have Armin Watts, who's been kind of a developmental defensive tackle as well. And then you have Jalen Twyman, who was a sixth-round pick, but at one point was a projected first- and second-round pick going into the draft process. And he kind of fell off after he opted out, and then he bulked up quite a bit. So out of all these depth pieces, I mean, probably could exclude Sheldon Richardson. Who are you most excited for?
Yeah, I was just going to say Sheldon Richardson for you threw in that last note. But because that one's pretty obvious. He's got experience in this league, and honestly, if he's just going in for pass rushing downs, that's what he does best, especially at that 3 technique spot. So I'd say I'm most excited about him just because you know what you're going to get, and it's a pretty good product. But as far as past that, with all these young guys we kind of got in the fold, Armin Watts is probably our best interior defensive tackle last year, albeit in a bad defensive line room. But still, I think he kind of stood above the rest, in my opinion, especially it reflects in the PFF grades when you look at him. But I also think I'm pretty excited about Jalen Twyman. Like you said, he had pretty high status in college football at Pitt there. Like you said, he was going to be a first, second-round pick, but then he opted out of the season, had kind of a bad offseason, and then now here we are. We got him in the 6th round. So I think that has the potential to be something, but if it doesn't, no skin off your back, 6th-round pick, not the end of the world, but you never know what you can turn up because he's the first interior defensive lineman at Pitt to have 10-plus sacks since Aaron Donald. And like when you're talking about Aaron Donald, that's some rare air. So hey, I can get excited about that. Maybe see if he can do something in the preseason, maybe flash. Generate some pressures, maybe get a couple sacks and stand out to the coaches. But
that'd be great.
I think Twyman probably is the one that stands out the most to me, but maybe Armin Watts too could take some steps forward and really assert himself in a rotation, even with pretty good depth, honestly, at defensive tackle this year with Tomlinson, Pierce, and then Richardson. So you never know.
Yeah, I think the preseason is going to be huge for this defensive line group this year as well. There's so many guys fighting for so many spots. You even have guys like Kenny Willekes, who missed all of last year with I think it was a torn ACL. You have some of these other practice squad guys. You have like Hercules Mataafa, who's been on the team the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So obviously there's not enough room for all these guys. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see how they battle it out here in the preseason. Just to wrap up here, kind of going back to the defensive end position, are you trusting like a DJ Wanham or a Stephen Weatherly, or do you think the Vikings should still try to go out and sign maybe bring like Everson Griffin back, or try to bring Justin Houston in as like a veteran pass rusher?
You know, I like those veteran pass rusher options, especially Everson Griffin, very familiar with the Vikings because he was here for a decade, and I can't ignore that. And statistically, he was better at pass rushing last year than anybody we had, but albeit we kind of cleaned out the room after last season. So you never know how he'd fit in with this group. But at the same time, I wouldn't mind entertaining it, but I think you've mentioned this to me in the past, that we probably would be worth waiting to see what we have first in these first couple of weeks of training camp. See if somebody, or maybe a couple people, if you're really lucky, can stand above the rest and really look like they're ready to start opposite Daniil and just win one-on-one matchups on the edge. Like if that happens, then I don't see the need for signing some veteran guy to just stand on the sidelines. But at the same time, like if it's the other way where we don't really see any production there, like that can be concerning, and then I think you really need to sign some guy like Everson Griffin or Justin Houston, or I think Melvin Ingram is still out there, right?
I think he just signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers, actually. So that's kind of a bummer because he was still doing well up until his injury last year. He was still producing at a high rate. So I'm in agreement with you, though. I'd say give the young guys a chance first. Give them a week or two of training camp. See how DJ Wanham comes back after a full off season, stuff like that. So, but yeah, I'm not against like bringing a veteran in and bringing Everson Griffin back, even though he tweeted some not so nice things about Kirk Cousins and he said some stuff about the Vikings last year. I think he was more just sour that they didn't bring him back, but it gets to the point where you don't want him to necessarily be a distraction either. You don't need that stuff in a year where you're trying to win it all. So
people have fights.
That's true.
It could be looked past. I'd like to think if we really needed to, it could probably be worked out between him and Kirk. I feel like Kirk can look past it, but at least you'd hope. And I think Everson's respected amongst a lot of those guys, too, especially on the defense. So. Absolutely. And I think another thing to consider, too, real quick, with these veteran defensive ends that we could possibly sign, we have the cap space. Like, money's no issue at this point. So, like, that's really nice to have in your back pocket just in case. So I think that's always something to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that will do it for this edition of the North Star Takes podcast. Be sure to like our video and stay tuned for more content by subscribing to our channel. And leave a comment as well about how you're feeling about the Vikings defensive line this season and maybe who you think will jump out and surprise all of us. So give us a follow on Instagram and Twitter as well. And thanks for watching.